The Royals did what they needed to do in the first 12 games out of the All-Star break. Is it going to be enough going into tomorrow? We'll give you our thoughts next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is another edition of Locked On Royals in the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. That is at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us on wherever you listen to podcasts. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Odyssey, and YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener wondering how we do this channel here, I bring you episodes Monday through Friday, 30-minute episodes in length, as well as 60-second YouTube shorts after the games. They'll be sure to get one up after I post this podcast as well. And you can check out the Locked On Royals postcast, which is hosted by Chance Lebo, and he goes to you live for about 15 to 20 minutes after each and every Royals game. And that extends into the weekend. So if you want more content for Saturday and Sunday, you can count on Chance for that. Before we get started, I want to tell you that today's show is brought to you by Monarch Money. And you can take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off on your first year. Another thrilling victory for the Royals today, and for what the first 9 innings was pretty maddening. You got a pretty exciting and eventful 10th inning as the Royals walk off the Atlanta Braves 1-0. It marks 3 consecutive series wins for the Royals, and they are now just 1 game under 500. And as I speak, 3.5 games back of a wild card spot with a 9-game road trip set to begin on Friday. Now, let's maybe start with the game before we dive into more of the complex, I wouldn't say issues, but topics of what we're going to be talking about today. For starters, the Royals did a pretty incredible thing without a starter today. They went with a bullpen game. They did call up Thomas Hatch yesterday. He was just available in case things extended past the 10th inning or Angel Serpa spiraled in the first, or the game got out of control and you just need somebody to wear those innings and wear all the runs that the Braves were going to score. But Thomas Hatch was the only pitcher not to throw out of the bullpen for the Royals today. They win it 1-0. They have 9 different pitchers combined for a 10-inning shutout. And you needed everybody today, except for Thomas Hatch, of course. Serpa did his job. Jonathan Bowen gave you 2 really good innings. John Schreiber maybe had the best performance of anybody out of the bullpen by striking out the side in the 4th inning. You got enough from Steven Cruz. You got enough from Hunter Harvey, who's been impressive since coming off the injured list and pitching for the first time in, what would that be, 2.5 months, 3 months? Lucas Erceg worked out of a jam. Carlos Estevez went 1-2-3. And how about Sam Long? Sam Long was one of 2 guys left in the bullpen, of course, the other being Thomas Hatch. And he faces a 1st and 3rd and nobody out, and had to go through Sean Murphy, who he struck out. He then had to go through Eli White, who he struck out. And then he got a line out to end the 10th inning. And from that point on, you just knew, all right, the Royals are walking this thing off in the 10th inning. Even though they had 2 hits going into the 10th inning, you knew after that moment, if Sam Long is going to work out a 1st and 3rd and nobody out, you're going to be winning this game. And it was vitally important that the Royals won this game today. If you can recall, about midway through the All-Star break, we had an episode where we talked about what needs to happen before July 31st. And we specifically talked about the record, what they need to do, bare minimum, to give themselves a shot going into the final 2 months of the season. Now, 54-54 is not where they want to be. They would love to be holding on to a playoff spot. They would love to be leading this division. It's just not the reality of 2025. And it's still not a perfect scenario. They've got Chris Bubich, who's done for the year. Cole Reagans is on the IL. Michael Lorenzen's on the IL. They still have guys like Michael Massey, a regular, who's working his way back up, though he hasn't performed up to standards this year. They didn't have Hunter Harvey for 3 months, as I said. They've had some players underperform, but here they are, within striking distance. I will call it that, within striking distance of a wild card spot. And I'm pretty interested in talking about our final segment today, which goes hand in hand with segment number 2. What the plan is for tomorrow and why that plan should basically, be played off of what some of these other teams are doing. And so we'll save that for the third and final segment, just a little bit of a tease for you right there. But they needed to go 7-5 to circle it back to our conversation in the All-Star break. They needed to go 7-5 in those first 12 games to ensure that they gave themselves a chance. Now, this was before they acquired Adam Frazier. This was before they acquired Randall Grichuk, and they extended Seth Lugo. But in my opinion, going into that final day, the deadline being 5 p.m. tomorrow, you had to be one game under 500 at bare minimum. And after they got walked off on that Friday against Miami, they put up one run against the Marlins in game 2. You're thinking, man, they need to go 7-3 over these next 10, and you haven't even gone to Wrigley Field to play the Cubs. You haven't played the Guardians, and you haven't played the Braves. And they go 7-3 over those next 10. And if Cleveland loses tonight, they'll have sole possession of second place. And if the Mariners lose tonight, they will be 3 games back going into the off day and the trade deadline tomorrow. And so I look at what today represents. It represents a team that still can be resilient, that can win with their worst offensive performance of the season. And I believe you can go as far to say that. I tip my cap to the local kid in Joey Wentz shoving today. I tip my cap to the Braves almost pulling off a win without Ronald Acuna Jr. But still, the Royals were the team that had far more to play for than Atlanta, which is crazy to say because I thought the Braves would be a 90-plus win team this season and probably would have gotten to that point if they didn't have all 5 starters from opening day go on the injury list. But you lost game 1. You got thumped in game 1, gave up 10. Rich Hill was disastrous. The bullpen was disastrous. The offense was good enough. But you looked at those final 2 games and you said, it's a must. You have to win these final 2. And I didn't want to put that out before today's game. Didn't want to jinx anything. But I wanted to say that, today is so very important to come away with another series win because you've played great baseball in July. We've talked about this pace that they need to be on, being about 15 games over 500 in the second half. And so far, so good. I mean, if you would have lost today, you're 500. It's not a huge difference from 7-5, but it really feels like it is. You got momentum going into tomorrow. You can make moves tomorrow, and you can believe in what you're doing. If you lost today and you limp out of town, let's just call it as it is, a series loss to a team that's 16 games under 500 without their star player, you're not feeling great about the 9-game road trip. Toronto, the best record in the American League, and then you have Boston, a team you're chasing right after that, a tough place for the Royals to play at Fenway Park. And then you got Minnesota, thankfully, and Minnesota appears to be all in on the selling part, though they're faking everybody out with these fake, hug watches. You had Johan Duran, then you had Willie Castro. They're hugging players, and they're getting pulled from the game, and yet they're not being traded, at least of yet. Tomorrow's going to be wild. And I will always say this, though I don't recall if I said it last year, so maybe that's going against my point. Tomorrow is the most fun day for me to do a podcast over for the entire season. Of course, you got the playoffs, you got opening day. That's all fine and dandy. It's exciting. Tomorrow is so fun, which is why I might have 2 episodes tomorrow. Going to try to get one out in the morning, and then going to try to get one out if the Royals make any moves post 5 o'clock. Still, I will just say I'm planning on 1 episode, but would not be surprised if we have 2. So if there's a lot of moves that happen, and I've already posted an episode at 2 or 3 o'clock, and then at 5 o'clock, you get more moves to happen, I will have an episode tomorrow night. So you can count on that. Depending on when the Royals make moves, that will determine how many episodes we have. And I will still have a Mailbag Friday the very next day. But that's the fun part about the trade deadline, and especially a trade deadline when you know your team's going to be active. And I fully expect the Royals to be active. Now, I want to pull up something from my place of work earlier today. If you're fans of 810 WHB, Steven St. John with a new day of SSJ had assistant GM Scott Sharp on this morning, and he was hinting at this team looking to add arms. Funny enough, we talked about that in yesterday's episode, but that he said you're looking to upgrade the rotation a little bit with the Michael Lorenzen type arm. Now, that's going to lead me into our next segment here, which is about who the Royals can acquire and why it makes more sense. Yes, it might be piggybacking off of what we talked about yesterday, but there's more than just pitching that this team needs. So let's take our first break of the show. When we come back, what is the plan before 5 p.m. tomorrow? Of course, the trade deadline. We'll talk about that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Want to tell you about our title sponsor today in Monarch Money. And with Monarch Money, have you ever wished that managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money and use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off on your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off on your first year. I promise you guys, you got to take care of your finances. I know that I do when looking at where my money's going to. I was able to go watch the game at a bar today. Glad to know I had a little bit of money left over because, yes, with Monarch Money, I'm able to make sure I have a little bit of that money left over. So if you're struggling with that, can't recommend Monarch Money enough. As I mentioned, tomorrow is going to be a blast. From start to finish, I expect big moves to happen. A lot of relievers are going to be traded. That's already been happening over the first couple days of this week. I expect a big name player or two to be moved. But when it comes to the Royals, because I know it's what everybody comes to this podcast for, I expect them to be active. I expect them to add a pitcher, and I still expect them to add a bat. I'll put it at 2 for right now. I've seen all these trade proposals that were sent my way. Could this guy be acquired by the Royals for this player and this player? I'm going to reiterate what I said yesterday, which is that the Royals are in this position where you are in the hunt. You are absolutely in the hunt for a playoff spot, and you're trying to evaluate what your plan should be, right? Is this an all-in year? Now, if I was to pull up a couple of our episodes from a month ago, month and a half, I remember saying, and I'll call myself out, I remember saying this team, if they're going to make any trades, it needs to be for players not only this year, but for the year after that, and hopefully beyond that. However, if you made trades for those players, you were going to have to give up, one of your top prospects. You'd have to part ways with Blake Mitchell. You'd have to part ways with maybe David Shields. And those were things that maybe the Royals didn't want to do. But if I'm looking at the state of this team, what needs to happen for them to make the postseason? Of course, you would love to have a player that you can pencil in the middle of the order, you can put them in the outfield, and they're just great for you the rest of the way. In an ideal world, that could make a lot of sense. It would work out well for the Royals, and maybe even that trade, you don't give up what you thought you had to. It's just not how the market seems to be playing out. The market seems to be playing out in favor of some of these teams that are selling. I mean, the Mets sent 3 players to the Giants for 34-year-old Tyler Rogers. And Tyler Rogers has been great for San Francisco this year. Also, his brother Taylor was traded as well in the Key Brian Hayes deal. But the Mets gave up 3 players, their number 10, number 12 prospect, and then Jose Butto, if you can remember last year, shoving against the Royals when the Royals were up in Queens very early on in April. But again, the market is going to dictate a lot of this. If the Royals wanted a big-name player, well, the prices might be too high. So it brings me back to my point, how do you go about it? Well, they've chosen 2 rental players so far. And what they gave up was a 28-year-old player who's hitting sub 270 in AAA. That's Cam Devaney. Not saying it can't get better for him, but the Royals have had Adam Frazier do just fine since being acquired from the Pirates. And then Randall Grichuk didn't have a great day today, but you gave up a mid-20s reliever who's more of a 4A guy. If you wanted to add 2 more rentals, a bat and then another arm, you might want to do that and still not give up anybody inside of your top 30. And I can see the logic in that. You feel that they could be upgrades for what you have right now. You can tailor to the strength of your team, the Bobby Witt Jr.'s, the Vinny Pasquantino, Salvador Perez, Seth Lugo, Micah Waka, and Noah Cameron, Lucas Erceg, Carlos Estevez. You're trying to give those guys a chance, and you don't want to deplete your farm system, right? Because you have to understand it's still an uphill battle to get to the postseason. Now, if you acquire an outfielder with multiple years of control, I'm still fine with it. The right player, of course. But if you give up a Blake Mitchell and you give up a David Shields for a big name player and it doesn't work out and that player struggles and he's not very good next year, you're probably regretting that decision. Now, that's the case with all trades. You might end up regretting moving a player for a certain player when you're trying to make the postseason. It's why there's always more pressure on buyers than there are sellers. If the Royals choose to go the route of the rental, though, it's not as poor of a thought process as I once thought it would be. If you acquire 2 more rentals and you give up nobody that's inside of your top 30, or you give up guys that are in the 20 to 30 range, what are you stressing about? What are you panicking about? The Royals gave up Caden Wallace, their number 2 prospect, for Hunter Harvey last year. Caden Wallace is hitting 209 this year in the Nationals farm system. It doesn't always mean that player is going to thrive somewhere, but if you're giving up guys that aren't even on the radar, or even close to making their debut in Kansas City, it's worth upgrading your team now, giving it a slight push in the second half, and not parting ways with anybody that you really believe has a ton of value. So tomorrow, I believe you start with a pitcher. I believe you go and find who that starter on Saturday is going to be. Now, I'm going to hammer in my point again why I believe it's Aaron Civale. Now, Annie Rogers, who's done a great job reporting on the trade deadline and for the Royals all season long, talked to Q this morning. She puts out there that the scheduled starters will be Micah Waka on Friday in Toronto, and then you're going to have Seth Lugo on Sunday for the series finale. Saturday's TBD, and Noah Cameron would be available if needed. And it doesn't sound like he's going to be involved in any trade talks, because that's not what I got from the tweet. But it was that he can go if they don't acquire anybody, but he can also be pushed back to the Boston series if they do acquire somebody. Aaron Civale is on the White Sox, of course, and Aaron Civale's next scheduled start is on Saturday. So you could acquire him tomorrow and just pencil him in to start Saturday. He's already resting up to start on that game, and then you got things figured out. Maybe Michael Lorenzen can start next week against Boston or against Minnesota. And now you've got a rotation that has 5 guys, no more bullpen games, no more 45-year-old Rich Hills. But that's what I believe they would be looking for. And I don't believe that tweet is put out there if the goal isn't to acquire someone who could start on Saturday. It's too much smoke there. As I said before, where there's smoke, there's fire. So if you're looking to add an arm, and then we go back to Scott Sharp's comments on A New Day with SSJ, looking for a Michael Lorenzen type, that kind of feels like Adrian Hauser, who was scratched from the White Sox start today, and then Aaron Civale, who will start on Saturday if he's not traded, though I do believe he will be. And the Royals can have some insurance there in the rotation. And the best case is that Michael Lorenzen comes back sooner rather than later. Cole Reagans comes back sooner rather than later. Both of them return in the month of August. And then a guy like Aaron Civale is your swing starter, the same way that Michael Lorenzen was last year. If you need him to be that long relief guy, that multiple inning guy, he's there for that. If you need him to be a spot starter, you go to a 6-man rotation to prolong some of the health of this team's rotation, all the better. But I believe you can start there. You can go out there and get another rental pitcher. I do not believe that a guy like Aaron Civale would cost you much. A name that I brought up was like Chandler Champlain in AAA for Omaha. He's got an ERA over 7, was acquired in the Benintendi deal. Could be some upside for the White Sox, but I'm not, in ruins if he's included in a 1-for-1 deal. Or if it's a lottery ticket kid that you throw in there, a 17-year-old, a 16-year-old, good numbers, and you get that in return. You need a pitcher. That's, non-negotiable in my opinion. You can't go with another bullpen game. I'm not throwing Thomas Hatch against Toronto or Boston. You need to have somebody that has been starting games at the big league level this year. Then I'm pivoting to another bat. You think about what this lineup has been able to do in July and really going back until the end of June. And that's just been with adding a couple of league average guys. Randall Grichuk's a league average bat. And even if he has a day like today where he's 0 for 4 with 2 strikeouts or 0 for 3 with 2 strikeouts, he still can have days like the other night when he was 2 for 5 with a home run or had the big walk when it was 2nd and 3rd and 1 out in the 6th inning of last night's game. You give a different look to your outfield where you've gotten the worst production among anybody in baseball. Maybe you get a deal with the White Sox and you get Mike Tauchman and Aaron Savale. Mike Tauchman was somebody that's been a great rental for the White Sox. Great walk rate. That's always been a constant with him, even last year when he was with the Cubs. Not always going to have a lot of power. Good enough defense, can play all 3 spots, can put him anywhere in the lineup. He's going to get on base. That feels like a pretty nice deal. 2 for maybe 2 prospects, and you got 2 cheap rentals. They upgrade your team on the pitching side, and they also upgrade your team offensively. So there are going to be some players they look for to help this outfield. I'm all right with it being on the cheaper end, as long as that bat can be league average. And that's been the theme of my talks over the last handful of episodes. If you can get a league average bat, you would be floored at how quickly it changes this lineup. Because the outfield as a whole has done worse than everybody else in baseball. You raise the floor of that group just a little bit, and you might be able to go on that streak that we all hope the Royals can to put themselves in a playoff spot. We'll take our final break of the show. When we come back, let's talk about some of the other teams' plans and why it may benefit the Royals. That's coming up on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can follow us on wherever you get your podcast. Want to tell you about OpenPhone. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? Nope, you just called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important, and that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or your computer. OpenPhone is offering Locked On Royals listeners 20% off on your first 6 months at openphone.com/LockedOnMLB. That's OpenPhone.com/LockedOnMLB. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. Tomorrow, we're going to know the plan of every single team in baseball. And that's the beauty of 5 p.m. on the trade deadline. We're going to know who's buying, we're going to know who's selling, and we're going to know who didn't want to do anything. They just wanted to either trust their guys or they just didn't line up with a deal they truly liked, and they wanted to move forward with their roster the rest of the year. There were many times in the rebuilding Royals era where they just didn't trade anybody. They hung on to guys that they could have gotten value for, and they just didn't want to bottom out in the second half of the season. And in that process, they just prolonged that rebuilding phase, or they didn't trade for the right prospects. They didn't get good enough prospects. They didn't develop them properly. And that set them back for a handful of years. But it's going to be the flip side tomorrow. The Royals are going to be buyers, and they've made that pretty clear going back to the final day of the All-Star break when they acquired Adam Frazier. And even though at the time it felt minor, it was a rental player. And if you're selling, you're not acquiring rental players. And then they did the same thing with Randall Grichuk. And then they extended Seth Lugo. And I have to wonder if a part of their thought process was in correlation to the other teams in the American League wildcard race leaning towards selling. So a team that is now behind you, and you will see in 2 series, the Minnesota Twins. The Minnesota Twins seem pretty adamant in selling off pieces. And their current group of players, aside from Byron Buxton, who's on the IL, but he also wasn't going to waive his no-trade clause, Johan Duran, Griffin Jacks, guys that might be dealt. I doubt Joe Ryan will be, but there's a couple of offensive guys. Carlos Correa has been linked to Houston again. They could be blowing up this current version of the Minnesota Twins. It's one less team you need to worry about in the playoff race if they do intend to sell, which signs are pointing in that direction. You got the Angels, who are right there neck and neck with you, and they went out there and acquired 2 middle relievers in Luis Garcia and then Andrew Chafin, I believe, was the other reliever they got in that deal. But the Angels still have one of the worst run differentials in the AL. And that's something that I always feel is going to even out one way or another. Now, you can't be in the -50, -60 department and still be an 85 to 90 win team. You just won't be that lucky all season long. Eventually, those things are going to even out. And the Angels haven't been to the postseason in over a decade. So it's not like it's a team that always turns it on of late. They usually have collapsed at this point. So I do tip my cap in trying to make an effort, but they could have gotten a lot of value for guys that are under team control, a couple of rentals they have, but they're going to be going for it. It's more so a matter of, do you believe the Angels are going to be there when it's said and done? The really, really interesting team to follow is the Cleveland Guardians. With the Cleveland Guardians, you've got them contemplating trading away Stephen Kwan, a guy like Cade Smith out of their bullpen. Won't be trading Emmanuel Clase now, but who knows when he's going to be returning because of the gambling incident. Could be trading Shane Bieber, who's looked good in some rehab outings. So Cleveland, instead of buying, is probably leaning more towards selling, and they're neck and neck with you. And you've still got another series against Cleveland, but it does not appear that they are a firm believer in this group turning things around. Also another team that has a bad run differential. So that might be another team that you write off a little bit. A bad week, and they're going to be looking up at everybody else. Not as much, of course, as the Athletics or the White Sox, but they're going to be looking up at 5 or 6 teams. And it's just not a team that is built to overcome a 7.5, 8.5 game deficit. So now that brings you to Texas. And Texas, I do believe, is going to lean toward buying, but more so on the bullpen side of things. I don't see them adding to this offense, though they absolutely could. I was pretty surprised that the Reds got Key Brian Hayes, even though third base was an area they were looking to upgrade. Just didn't seem like it was going to be an in-division trade with a guy that's on a big-time deal. So maybe Texas does go for more offensive help, though they do really need bullpen help. That minimizes the group that you would be chasing. If you're not a believer in the Angels and you have Cleveland and Minnesota that's selling, that now puts you in a conversation of Tampa Bay, who also leans towards selling because they've just been on a treacherous stretch of play where they've not played maybe as bad of baseball as the worst teams in the American League for about a 15 to 20 game stretch. So if Tampa Bay is leaning towards selling and they're falling out of it, now you got Boston that you're looking at, you've got Texas that you're looking at, and you have Seattle. Seattle has indicated they're buying, but then you look at this wild card race and it's not what it used to look like, where there were 2 teams that were running away with it, and there was just that final playoff spot where it's up for grabs for about 6 teams. It's all pretty interchangeable at this point in time. In fact, it's very interchangeable. And the Royals might view it of a wide open American League wildcard race. And if we make moves, even tiny ones, now little rental players here and there, upgrading the offense here, upgrading the pitching staff here, you might be able to sneak in playing better baseball simply because everybody else is destined to play worse baseball by trading away some of their better players. If Cleveland deals Stephen Kwan, I can guarantee you that team is not going to be firmly in the hunt by the end of September. Too good of a player to trade away, and that's even if they acquired some good talent in return. I wouldn't imagine it would be for big league ready players. I'd imagine they'd be some top prospects, and maybe they would be guys they'd pencil into the lineup every single night. But Stephen Kwan is an incredible player for the Guardians. You trade that away, and then a couple of your top-end relievers, it's just not the same Cleveland team anymore, and it's a Cleveland team that has been struggling. Not so much in the second half, but all season long. To get the offense going, they had a 10-game losing streak before the break. That just might not be a team that can hang on for dear life without one of its top offensive contributors. And they're probably going to be dealing away Carlos Santana, though he hasn't done much. That's just another spot you have to worry about filling. Cleveland, Minnesota, the Angels, they all start to fall out of it. If the Royals can play good baseball, now you're putting yourself in that conversation of about 4 teams. And that feels far less daunting than like 7 teams that you're trying to worry about. And you've got that head-to-head with Texas and Kansas City. You've got that head-to-head with Boston coming up shortly. You've got that head-to-head with Seattle. There are all of these matchups that can play in your favor depending on how you're playing at that point. But the good news is the Royals will play good enough baseball to put themselves in a conversation to buy tomorrow by 5 p.m. They add a few more pieces. Who knows? Maybe here in a couple of weeks, in the next month, the Royals are right there on the cusp of a playoff spot. But a great 3-series stretch for them. They take 2 from Chicago, they take 2 from Cleveland, and they take 2 from Atlanta. Now, an off day tomorrow can just simply work on trying to upgrade the roster, and then they'll head north for a 9-game road trip where they'll be taking on Toronto, they'll be taking on Minnesota, and they'll be taking on Boston. The Boston will be the second series. Minnesota will round out the 9-game road trip. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I have been your host, Jack Johnson. Thank you for making Locked On Royals your first listen today. For your second, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale and find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. Tomorrow, completely up in the air. Might be getting you 2 episodes, might be giving you 1 after 5 p.m. We'll just play it by ear once again, but should be a blast of a day in baseball. The trade deadline will conclude at 5 p.m. Central Time tomorrow. How many moves will the Royals make? Let us know in the YouTube comments below. But until tomorrow, you take it easy, Kansas City.